if you have a Bible on you, please take it and open it up to the book of Matthew. I started in Matthew because it was Christmas time, and when it's Christmas time, you talk about Christmas, so I went to Matthew to talk about that. And I just want to catch us all up and remind us of why we're here and where we're going and what we're really looking at. So we're just going to go real quick through Matthew. Just turn to chapter 1. And in chapter 1, you see a bunch of names. And the reason why those names are there is to show that a king was coming. And then in 1:18, you see now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. And it means that the king is then born. And then when you go to chapter 2, you see in verse 2, Herod, he hears from the wise men, and the wise men say, "Where is he who was born king of the Jews?" So there's still a king coming. Then when you look at it in 2:16, you see that Herod wanted to kill the king, which is something that's just quite something. As we talked about weeks ago, just quite something that not everybody wanted to live under this king. There was others that wanted to be king instead of him. So the king has to kind of run away. And then you get to chapter 3 and you see John the Baptist is preparing the way. And what is he preparing the way for? He's preparing the way for the king. He's heralding the way of the king. When a king would come, when a king was going to come to your town, people would go in front of him and they'd be like, "The king is coming, the king is coming." And so John the Baptist is preparing the way for the king. Then the king gets baptized, 3:13. Why is the king getting baptized? It's because he is identifying not as a ruler that comes down, but rather as a servant that comes alongside. In chapter 4, this king is tempted and prevails. And then if you look at 4:12, the king begins his ministry, and that's where we were last week. And then he starts to minister and he starts to teach. Last week we talked about how Jesus did 3 things. In 4 verse 23 it said, "And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease." And what we see in chapters 5 through 7 is that very first thing. And he went throughout Galilee, teaching. We start with the teaching of Jesus. And what he's teaching about is exactly what chapters 1 through 4 have been talking about. If there's a king, what do citizens of his kingdom have to be known for? That's the question. What does it mean to live in this kingdom? We want to evaluate this morning, are we citizens of his kingdom? And what does that mean? The phrase kingdom of heaven is found 32 times in the book of Matthew. It's actually only found in the book of Matthew. And I spent all week, it was so exhausting, I'm not going to lie, trying to figure out what is this kingdom? What is the kingdom of heaven? It's like, Jesus, why can't you be a little bit more clear? I looked at all 32 things, and I'm just like, okay, so the kingdom belongs to the children. And the Pharisees are shutting the door in the faces of those that would enter the kingdom. And then Jesus is telling all sorts of stories about the kingdom is like a field, and then a kingdom is like a net, and then a kingdom is like a pearl. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, can't you just tell me what it is? Bottom line, I spent hours on it. I read others' interpretations. Bottom line, the kingdom of heaven is confusing. I wish I could stand up here and go, I've got it. I don't really. It's confusing. It's confusing because it's both here and it's there. It's both now and it's later. It's both a present reality and it's a future reality. It's visible and it's invisible. It's something on the inside, it's also something on the outside. It's confusing, but the instructions to those that live in this kingdom are pretty clear, and we're going to look at it first. So Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount, one of the most famous parts of Scripture and most confusing, lucky me. Chapter 1, seeing the crowds. If you look back just one verse, in 4:25 it says, and great crowds followed from Galilee. So seeing the crowds, in other words, Jesus looks, he's like, wow, there's a lot of people here. What should I do? I'm out of here. He went up on a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you because of me, falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. The title of this sermon is Living Blessed in a Confusing Kingdom. Living blessed in a confusing kingdom. And I think we're going to see 5 ways that we can live blessed in a confusing kingdom. And here's the first one. You can jot it down in your notes. To live blessed in a confusing kingdom, come and let Jesus teach you. To live blessed in a confusing kingdom, come and let Jesus teach you. Jesus sees the crowds and he takes off. He goes up on a mountain and he sits down. Now, in our culture today, it's a little different. When somebody's going to teach about the Bible, the teacher usually stands up and everybody else sits down. Back then, it was a little different. When a teacher had something to say back then, he sat down. He sat down. And then they're like, oh, it's time for him to teach. It's also very interesting. We've talked about this in the past. What Jesus is doing is kind of the same thing as Moses. Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and then he went up on a mountain by himself, and then he heard from God, and then he came down and he taught the people. He delivered the law. Jesus fasts 40 days, 40 nights. It makes sense. What's he going to do next? He's going to go up on a mountain. Only this is different. This is very different, because when Moses went up on the mountain, it was only him that heard from God. Only him. No one else was invited. But as we've seen from the book of Matthew, everyone is invited here, and God himself is going to be talking. Jesus continues to fulfill Scripture. Psalm 78, 1 and 2 says, give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. Here it is. I will open my mouth in a parable. That's what it means in verse 2 where it says, and he opened his mouth and he teaches. Now some people, again, I read all sorts of different things on this. Some people say that Jesus is teaching, this is what a disciple is. I think that's one of the things that he's doing. That's one of the things that he's doing. He's doing more than that. These Beatitudes, as you read them, they're both simple, they're really complex. They're easy to understand, and yet they're really, really hard to understand. They can be read as a series of facts. Blessed are the mercy, for they shall receive mercy. That's a fact. But they can also be read as a promise. In other words, do this, get this. It can also be seen as a series of challenges. And I think it's really important for all of us to know this morning, it's really important for us to know that as we read through these, the same thing is going to be true. As we read through the Ten Commandments, you will come to one conclusion: I can't keep those. I can't keep those. And as you read through the Beatitudes, you'll also come to the conclusion that you can't teach those. There's a really, really slippery slope. It's not easy when you're reading stuff like this. When you read all of these commands of Jesus, you can walk away and you can go, there's no way that I'm going to keep those. I can't do it. And so you can walk away humiliated and despairing. Is that what God wants? No. You can also read them and you can go, okay, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. And so you can walk out proud and self-sufficient. Meaning I can do that. Look at me. I'm pretty fantastic at that. And that as well would not be good. Neither of those things is the gospel. Neither of those things. And so it's very important that as you look at these, you realize I can't keep them. I can't keep them, but Christ kept them for me. What does it look like to come? What does it look like to come and learn from Jesus? And it's really quite simple. It's this book. Come and let Jesus teach you. It's this book. Come and let Jesus teach you. In order to live blessed, in order to not be so confused, in order not to drift, this book, Psalm 119 says, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. It also says, thy word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. In order to live blessed in a confusing kingdom, you have to be taught by Jesus. But you also have to remind yourself of the gospel. You have to remind yourself of the gospel. And the gospel is this, that I am a sinner. That I am a sinner. That God is holy. And that God sent his son to take my place. He lived the life that I could not live on my behalf. Don't slide down. It's so easy. It's so easy to look at lists of things and slide one way or another in terms of I'm going to despair or I'm really awesome. And neither one of those is gospel. So stay in the middle. And the one way you can stay in the middle is by coming and letting Jesus teach you. When you look at these Beatitudes, you can kind of divide them up into two sections. The first one is in verses 3 through 6, where he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Now, most pastors, when they preach this, they'll take a week on every single one, but then we get through Matthew in like the year 2024, and so we're not going to do that. We're actually going to get through all of them in 1 week, so it's pretty quick. So what's the point? As I look at all of those, this is the point. All right, to live blessed in a confusing kingdom, you must get over yourself. You must get over yourself. Poor in spirit, mourning, hungering, thirsting, gentle. What do all of those things have in common? All of them are getting over yourself, looking at them one at a time. Poor in spirit. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? Poor in spirit means you are aware of your spiritual need. You are aware of your spiritual need. You are aware of your spiritual powerlessness. You are aware of your spiritual bankruptcy apart from Christ. Poor in spirit is when you realize that you're a mess. Poor in spirit is when you read the Beatitudes, or where you read the Ten Commandments and you realize that you have not kept them, but that instead you need Christ. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to get to the place where you're poor in spirit. It's actually a very, very good thing to get to the place where you're poor in spirit. What Jesus would have said here would have shocked his audience. It still does, quite honestly. I think it shocks me as much as it shocked them. And I think it's because we still kind of have the same ideas that they had back then. There were really 4 groups, and it's in your, there were really 4 groups back then. And each one of them chose a different part of the kingdom. You had the Pharisees. The Pharisees thought that it was all about keeping the law. It's all about keeping the law. You can jot that down in your notes. It's not about the law. I think you have 4 blanks there. I'll go nice and slow so you can get them all. Last week when we finished, there were some blanks that weren't filled out, and it drives people nuts. So it's not about law. The Pharisees wanted to keep all of the laws. They took all of the laws and they kept them perfectly. If you were a normal person back then seeking to know God, you would have looked at a Pharisee and you would have went, whoa, they've got it put together. They're doing everything right. They don't make any mistakes. Because they kept the law. They actually added to them. But what Jesus is saying is it's not about the law. Do you see that in the Beatitudes? Where he's like, the kingdom of heaven is for those that keep the law. Nope. The kingdom of heaven is not one of law. Then you had the Sadducees. The Sadducees, they denied all the miracles. They denied all the supernatural. They denied the resurrection. In other words, what they did is they worshiped logic. And it's not about logic. All of them are going to start with L. It's going to be cute like that. Okay? It's not about law. It starts with L. The Sadducees, they thought the kingdom was one of logic, knowledge. Look at that person. They're so brilliant spiritually. They know everything. They're so smart. And Jesus is like, yep, you miss it too. Then there was this group called the Essenes. The Essenes, what they would do is they're like, oh my goodness, the world is so terrible that I'm just going to go off and I'm not going to, I'm going to be so poor and I'm not going to talk with anybody and I'm just going to sit here and think about God all day long. And history repeats itself because monks did it again like 1,500 years later. Okay? The kingdom is not about loneliness. The kingdom is not about loneliness. And when you look at verse 7, right? Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. It's really hard to be merciful if you're not around anybody. Blessed are the peacemakers. In order to be a peacemaker, you have to be in relationships. The kingdom is not about loneliness. So the Essenes had it wrong. And then there was this last group, and they were the Zealots. And the Zealots, they thought the kingdom was about like Rome's big bunch of fat jerks. Okay, and they have to get out of here, and they're going to go to hell, and then Jesus is going to come, the Messiah is going to come, and we're all going to be an army, and we're all going to kick their butts, but as we're waiting for it, let's just kill as many Romans as we can. These are the Zealots. They had it wrong too, because the kingdom is not one of leveling people. It's not one of violence. Has it ever struck you how things don't change? Here we got 2,000 years ago, we got 4 different groups of people, and they're all like, following God is about keeping the law. Following God is about logic. Go to Bible study. Following God is about, just withdraw by yourself and think about God all day long. And following God is about being on a crusade. Post on Facebook. And march. And Jesus sits down on this mountaintop and he's like, no. Y'all missed. It's about lowliness. It's about lowliness. It's about getting over yourself. All those things are for people that are strong in spirit. I keep the law so well. I study so well. I'm so devoted to God. I'm eliminating the enemy. They all thought that they were so devoted. They were all strong in spirit. And Jesus says that the kingdom is for those that are poor in spirit. It's also for those that mourn. What does that mean? I looked it up in a few different places. James 4:9, people are mourning over their own sin. John 16, verse 20, they're mourning over Jesus dying. 2 Corinthians 1:7, they're mourning over their suffering. 2 Corinthians 7, verse 10 is mourning that leads to repentance. What ties all these passages together is that there's a sin aspect in every single one of them. You're mourning over your sin. You're mourning over your sin. You're mourning over the sin you see in others. You're mourning over the sin that you see in the world. As you look inside and as you look outside and as you look around you, you're just like, man, this stuff is broken. I'm part of the problem. You mourn over your sin. This is a big challenge today. It's a big challenge in the church. Huge challenge in the church. The church today is like, come, smile, wear nice clothes, sing loud, raise your hands. Don't you dare say what's really on your mind. When somebody asks you, how are you doing? You just nod and say, good. Or fantastic. You paint that smile on your face as hard as you can. It's not the kingdom. Blessed are those that mourn. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Because we're not over ourselves. But the kingdom is for those that get over themselves, that stop pretending that everything is awesome all the time. Jesus is saying here it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to let your tears be seen. It's okay to tell people how you are really doing. Blessed are those that mourn. Get over yourself and cry. There's comfort for you. They will be comforted. It's also for the meek. Most thought about as being gentle. My favorite definition of being meek, another hard word really, is power under control. Power under control. It's when you could smash somebody, but you choose not to. Humble. Humble. Embracing your weakness. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12:10, he says, for the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses. Insults, hardships, persecutions, we're going to get to those, and troubles that I suffer. He must have been living in the kingdom, huh? And troubles that I suffer for Christ, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Another part of getting over yourself is hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I thought about this. I mean, the donuts are really good, and I love coffee. I drink it like crazy. I'd give myself a headache every day if I could. So good. Because you hunger and you thirst. And I thought, oh, what is it to hunger and thirst for righteousness? You're hungry when you don't have, what? Food. The questions I ask you will be easy every time, I promise. Okay? You're thirsty when you need something to... There you go. There's the confidence. There it is. It's not a trick question. In other words, you don't have it. You're hungry when you don't have food. You're thirsty when you don't have water. And he's saying, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So in other words, you have to look inside. You have to get over yourself. And you have to be like, I'm not righteous, but man, would I like to be. As I thought about this, I was like, people that are you're not physically hungry if you're full of food, and you're not spiritually hungry if you're full of yourself. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Those first four Beatitudes, how do you tie them together? All of them refer to people that are not proud. And to live blessed in a confusing kingdom, the first thing we must do is get over ourselves. And after we get over ourselves, then we can get on to loving others. That's the second point. We can get to loving others, I think is what I put down. Verse 7 through 9. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I like this one. It's honestly my favorite beatitude because it's just so simple. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I mean, if you look up 2 verses, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. What on earth does that mean? They shall inherit the earth. What does it mean? You get the globe? If you're humble, you get the globe? What are you talking about, Jesus? But let's not go backwards. It took long enough to get through the first point, right? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Mercy might be the chief attribute of God. When Moses was like, hey, tell me who you are, God's like, merciful. What does that mean? It means loving to others, meeting the needs of others, forgiving those that hurt you. It's the king's chief attribute, so it's got to be the chief attribute of those that live in the kingdom. Love others. Meet their needs. Show mercy. You see something broke that you can fix? Fix it. Especially if it's a person. Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. What does it mean to be pure in heart? Psalm 24 verse 4 says, who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, but he that has clean hands and a pure heart. So there's a combination. Those clean hands refer to like doing harm to people. Those that are pure in heart, they don't seek to do harm to people. They seek to help. Jesus says, you will see God. What does that mean? Well, it means, it's another confusing one. It means here and there. Not to skip ahead to the very end of Matthew, but if you go to the end of it, he tells this parable about sheep and goats. There's this judgment day that comes, and he's like, people are coming to him, and he's like, no, goat, sheep, and some of the sheep think they're goats, and some of the goats think they're sheep. And basically what that means is some people that think they're getting into heaven are not, and some people that don't think they're getting into heaven are getting in. And what separates them is just like, hey, when do we see you? Jesus is like, hey, remember, you did that for me. And they're like, when did we see you? When did we see you? And he's like, I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. So there's a combination here. If you want to see God now, you have to be pure in heart. Can you see him now? Can you see him? But it also says, Revelation 24 says that they will see his face. So it is talking about heaven as well. And then it says to be a peacemaker. It's about the state of your relationships. Do you work for peace or do you work for discord? Do you show mercy? Are you pure in heart? Are you a peacemaker? You have to get on to loving others. But then, huge curveball. Huge curveball, at least in my opinion. Maybe not yours, but to me, big curveball. Because one would think that a person that's merciful, pure in heart, and a peacemaker would have nothing but friends. Seriously. Don't you just love so-and-so? They're so merciful. They're so pure in heart. They're so peacemaker. Also in 10, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. In other words, you do the right thing and you get killed for it. What? So to live blessed in a confusing kingdom. And that is a confusing kingdom. That is a confusing kingdom. It's almost like I named this sermon Opposite Day. Happy are you when you cry. What? Happy are you when you're poor. What? Happy are you when people lie about you behind your back. I takes the cake there, Jesus. I think I'm going to climb off this mountain. I'm going to go fishing. To live blessed in a confusing kingdom, expect persecution. Expect persecution. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Expect persecution. I mean, seriously. The transition from verse 9 to 10 gives me whiplash. Blessed are the peacemakers that are persecuted. What sense does it make? And this is the sense that it makes. There's more to this world than what you can see. There's more to this world than what you can see. That's why it makes sense. Blessed are those that are persecuted for righteousness' sake. By the way, not because of your sin. Not because of your sin. Whenever you're persecuted, you got to look. You got to look close. It's not always easy. You got to look close. Ask some people around you. Read the Word. Why am I suffering right now? Is it me? Is it my sin? Or is it my righteousness? Which one is it? Because he says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Examples of people that were persecuted for righteousness' sake. Abel. There were like 4 people on the face of the earth before somebody was persecuted for being righteous. Do you ever think about that? Like Adam and Eve. They like each other. They have some boys. One of the boys offers a good offering. The other one offers a bad one. God's like, hey, that offering was great because I see your heart. And Cain's like, oh, your heart's good. Die! I'm going to kill you. Abel, Job, so righteous, right? Satan strolls into God's throne room and is, where you been, Satan? Oh, just around. Have you considered Job? No one as righteous as him. Suffering for righteousness' sake. Joseph, Potiphar's wife, come to bed with me, you stud muffin. No! You're not mine. It's bad. I'm not going to do that. Go to jail, Joseph. Moses, Elijah, Daniel. Daniel was like perfect. And he got a sleepover with a bunch of lions. Perfect. Perfect. Jesus, Stephen, and all of the disciples. Every last one of them. Blessed are you when others revile, persecute, and utter evil against you falsely on my account. They persecuted the prophets, they'll persecute you. Allegiance to Jesus will come with persecution, and when it happens, you're to rejoice and be glad. Again, why should I? They hurt me. Oh, because what kingdom are you living for? What kingdom are you living for? The one that your eyes see, or the one that you know exists by faith? Focus on heaven, the rewards. Blessed are you, blessed are you. I'm such a clarity guy. I just got to be honest with you. This sermon drove me nuts. Because I'm looking at this and I'm like, blessed are you. He says it so many times. For they shall, that's great. Blessed are, they shall. Blessed are, they shall. And I'm just driving myself nuts from like Sunday to Thursday going, how and when? How? When? How will you bless me? When? How and when? And you know what answer God gave me? Nothing. Because the how and the when is up to Him. Because it's about Him. He's the King. He's the King. The king gets to make the decisions. The king decides when. The king decides how. Not us. But expect persecution. And then lastly, to live blessed in a confusing kingdom, preserve and protect life. Preserve and protect life. We get two you are statements here in verse 13 and 14. It says, you are. Now it's not you will be, it's you are. Verse 14, you are the light of the world. So you are. So these aren't later statements, these are now statements. Right? They're statements of fact. Jesus uses two things, really easy to understand. It's really nice that he does that, actually. After verses 12 through 11, I was so glad to get to verse 13 and 14 because they actually make a little bit of sense. It's like, okay, I understand salt. I understand salt. I don't understand what it is to inherit the earth. But I understand salt. Salt does a few things. It preserves and it enhances flavor. Today, we think of salt as enhancing flavor. Back then, a little, but more so they thought of it as a preservative. Preservative against what? Preservative against decay. Meat gets nasty. I work at Chick-fil-A now during the week. Meat gets nasty. When it stays stuck in a corner somewhere for a while, it gets nasty. Chick-fil-A is actually exceptionally clean. But, let me tell you, you know, when the nugget's sitting right there in the fryer, it's like, man, that thing looks good. But after it's like gone down on the floor and been stepped on a few times, it's like, that's nasty. And if it stayed there a little longer, it would get even nastier. It would rot. It would absolutely rot. And sometimes this world is nasty. Kind of the best word for it would actually be corrupt. Corrupt. Corruption. You know why they beat the heck out of the prophets? Because they spoke up against corruption. I read one sermon this week that says, oh, you haven't been persecuted, huh? You're probably not telling the truth. You're salt. You are salt. Enhance and preserve. True disciples keep this earth from decay. We want to preserve life. True disciples want to preserve life. It's a sermon all to itself. Can you imagine what the world would be without people? Can you imagine if you just, I'm a history guy, right? Rid the world of everybody that's ever stood up against corruption. What kind of the world would it be in? You know, take away the Dr. Kings. Take away the William Wilberforces. He's the guy that spoke up against slavery. Take away the Moseses. You know, Moses is just going to sit there and shut up instead of confronting. What happens? The world becomes a nasty piece of meat. That's what happens. You are salt. Jesus says, if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? That's so confusing. Salt is salt no matter what. There's no such thing as salt losing its taste. So I don't know if it was Tuesday or something, I was talking to my dad, and I'm just like, I'm reading this thing, and I'm just like, have I lost my saltiness? Am I going to get thrown out and trampled by people? Because if I lost my saltiness, and then I'm like, whew, on Thursday, I'm like, okay, he's not saying that. He's just like, salt is salt. In other words, if you're not preserving life, you're not in the kingdom. That's what he's saying. If you're not preserving life. You are light. Salt will preserve. Light will protect. You ever tried to walk around in the complete dark? You get hurt. You get hurt. You know, imagine if somebody was like right on top of the stairs, you're sitting there with the switch, and as soon as they, get in the first second, dark, what happens? He gets hurt. Light protects life. What do people that are in the kingdom do? They preserve and protect. The world needs to be preserved because there's corruption. The world needs light because there is darkness. Take a look at the outline. Living in the kingdom, to live blessed in a confusing kingdom, get over yourself, get to loving others, expect persecution, and preserve and protect life. Who does that sound like? It's Jesus. It's Jesus. Did he get over himself? Oh yeah. Yeah. Like, how big is a baby at like 3 months? Isn't it like that? They always compare it to like a fruit, right? Like, isn't it like an apricot? Like the Son of God, the creator of the universe, decided that he'd be this big inside of a 14-year-old peasant. And if that wasn't enough, then he decides to go to the cross. So yeah, I'd say he got over himself. Did he get on to loving others? Oh yeah. Oh yes, he did. Oh yes, he did. Did he expect persecution? I don't want to talk about it. That's what he had to go through. But why? To protect and preserve life. To protect. What was he doing? Why was he born? Why was he on that cross? What's he doing? He's protecting and he's preserving life. So if we want to live in the kingdom, if you want to live blessed in the kingdom, what can you do? Because you ain't Jesus. I am not Jesus. You actually have to return to number one. You actually got to go to the top. You got to come. Verse 1's a big deal. Seeing the crowds, he went up on a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. So come to Jesus and let him teach you how to live blessed in a confusing kingdom. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your kingdom. Lord, I think the first thing I'd like to say is I'm sorry for the times that I have not lived in it. There's just something inside of me that wants to build my own kingdom. It's hard. It's hard. But you didn't say blessed are those that build their own kingdoms. You said blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom. My goodness, Lord, you're just going to give it to us? Help us to be poor in spirit. Help us to get over ourselves. Help us to get on to loving others. Lord, I've turned my eyes inward too much instead of out. Help me, help us to get over ourselves, get on to loving others. Lord, help us to endure what persecution may come in the name of protecting and preserving life. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.